Fleet Commander Zelthar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen before him. The planet was called Earth, according to the preliminary scans his people had conducted over the past several rotations, and it was home to a species that called themselves Humansilthar, belonged to the Vryn race, and his people were part of something much larger and far more powerful than any single species could hope to. Beatty Kryn hegemony had ruled the known galaxy for 3,000 standard cycles, and during that time they had brought order to chaos and civilization to countless primitive worlds. 7 advanced species formed the core of the hegemony, and together they possessed technology that made them virtually unstoppable in any conflict they chose to engage in. The Vryn provided the military leadership and tactical expertise that had won 100 wars across as many systems. The Korthax contributed their engineering marvels and ship designs that could cross vast distances in mere days. The Zelen offered their computational abilities and strategic planning that could predict enemy movements with remarkable accuracy. Together with 4 other species, the hegemony represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, and any species that refused to join peacefully was quickly convinced through demonstrations of overwhelming force. Earth had been discovered only recently, and the scans had revealed a civilization that barely qualified as spacefaring by hegemony standards. They had primitive rockets that could barely escape their own gravity, and their largest vessels were simple stations orbiting their home world. Their technology was laughably basic, and their weapons were crude chemical explosives and simple kinetic projectiles. The War Council had debated the annexation of Earth for exactly 4 hours before reaching a unanimous decision to proceed with standard integration protocol. Silthur had volunteered to lead the expeditionary force because annexing primitive worlds was simple work that would boost his standing within the military hierarchy without exposing him to any real danger. He commanded 12 warships, which was more than sufficient for dealing with a species that had never even encountered alien life before this moment. His second officer approached and gave a formal salute before speaking in the measured tones typical of Vryn military protocol. Fleet Commander, the hailing frequencies have been broadcasting for 6 hours now with no response from the surface. Zelthar considered this information carefully before responding. They are likely paralyzed with fear, or perhaps their communications technology is too primitive to properly receive our transmissions. The second officer nodded in agreement and returned to his station. Zelthar had seen this pattern many times before when dealing with lesser civilizations. First came the shock of realizing they were not alone in the universe. Then came the fear as they understood how outmatched they truly were. Finally came acceptance and integration into the greater hegemony, where they would be given technology and protection in exchange for resources and obedience. It was a fair arrangement that had worked successfully for millennia. Prepare to fire a demonstration shot at the lunar facility. Zelthar commanded. His weapons officer acknowledged the order and began targeting the small research station that humans had constructed on their moon. The facility was primitive, but it represented their highest achievement in space construction, and destroying it would show them exactly what they faced. A single beam of concentrated energy lanced out from the flagship and crossed the distance between the fleet and the moon in less than a second. The facility exploded in a brilliant flash that would be visible from Earth's surface even during their daylight. Horseltar allowed himself a small, satisfied expression. Now we wait for their response, he told his bridge crew. 3 hours passed, and then the sensors detected launches from Earth's surface. Multiple objects were accelerating toward the hegemony fleet on pillars of chemical fire, missiles, the sensor officer reported, with barely concealed amusement in his voice. Primitive kinetic missiles with what appears to be nuclear warheads. The bridge crew exchanged glances that mixed pity with professional disdain. These humans were actually trying to fight back with weapons that belonged in a museum. Raise shields to minimum strength. Zelthar ordered. There is no need to waste power on such pathetic attacks. The missiles reached the fleet and detonated against the shields in bright flowers of atomic fire. The shields barely registered the impacts, and the fleet remained completely undamaged. Zelthar composed a message to send back to the War Council. Initial contact with human civilization complete, he dictated. Demonstration of force successful and human resistance nominal and ineffective. Fleet shields withstood their most powerful weapons without strain. Estimate complete subjugation of Earth within one standard cycle. Proceeding with landing operations to secure major population centers, he transmitted the message and then turned his attention to the tactical display. His 12 ships began moving into position around Earth and preparing to deploy ground forces. Fleet Commander, the communications officer, called out, "We are receiving a transmission from Earth." "Put it through," Zelthar commanded. A voice came through the speakers, and the translation system struggled for a moment before rendering it in Vrin language. "You came to our home." The voice said it was male and young, and there was something in the tone that Zelthar could not quite identify. "You destroyed our station, and you think we will simply surrender. We have been killing each other for 10,000 years. The voice continued. "Did you really think you would be harder?" The transmission ended, and Zelthar felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling as unease. He dismissed it immediately, because feelings had no place in proper military operations. "Deploy assault craft to the surface," he ordered. "Target the major cities and prepare to accept their surrender." The assault began, and Zelthar watched from his command chair as events unfolded exactly as he expected them to. At least that was what he thought during those first few hours. What Zelthar did not know was that humans had been watching and learning and preparing since the moment his fleet entered their solar system. What he did not understand was that humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who used similar tactics and similar weapons. What he failed to grasp was that fighting aliens with superior technology was not fundamentally different from fighting enemies with superior numbers or superior position, and what he could not have possibly known was that this would be the last military operation he would ever command, because in 14 hours, Fleet Commander Zelthar would be dead, and his flagship would be a drifting wreck, and his entire expeditionary force would be nothing but debris orbiting a blue planet, and the Kryn hegemony would receive no further transmissions from Earth. High Marshal Krevd was not accustomed to feeling concerned, but as he reviewed the reports from the Oversight Committee, he could not deny the cold sensation spreading through his Core 14. Standard cycles had passed since Fleet Commander Zelthar last transmission, and there had been nothing but silence from the Earth system since that moment. No distress calls, and no status updates, and no requests for additional support. Simply nothing at all. The hegemony had protocols for every conceivable situation, but complete loss of contact with an entire battle group was not something those protocols had anticipated. Was unprecedented in the 3,000 cycle history of the Kryn hegemony. Assemble a battle group, the Oversight Committee had commanded. 3 times the size of Zelthar's force. Find out what happened and complete the annexation of Earth. Krevd had accepted the assignment because he was the most experienced fleet commander in the entire hegemony military structure. And if something had gone wrong, then he was the one most qualified to handle it. Commanded 36 warships now as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. Begin scanning. He ordered his sensor teams. I want to know everything about this system before we advance any further. The results came back within minutes, and what they revealed made Krevd's scales stand rigid with shock. Debris field detected in Earth orbit, the sensor officer reported. Composition matches hegemony warship construction. Multiple signatures consistent with destroyed vessels. Krevd moved to the tactical display and studied the readings himself. 12 signatures and 12 destroyed ships, Althar's entire expeditionary force had been wiped out. Advance cautiously, Kreft commanded. All shields to maximum and all weapons ready. Treat this as hostile territory. The fleet moved into the inner system, and the scope of the disaster became clearer with every passing horde. Sulphurous. Ships were not simply destroyed, but utterly shattered hulls had been breached in dozens of places, and the damage patterns suggested weapons that should not have been effective against hegemony shielding. Bring me the tactical logs, Krev demanded. I need to understand how this happened. His technical specialists worked for hours to recover data from the drifting wrecks and what they found disturbed. Krev more than the destruction itself. The humans had attacked with vessels that were inferior in every measurable specification. Their ships were slower, and their shields were weaker, and their weapons had less range and less power by all conventional military analysis. The humans should have been obliterated within the first hour of combat, but the tactical logs told a different story. The humans had not fought conventionally. They had hidden among the asteroids and struck from ambush. They had used their own damaged vessels as weapons and rammed them into hegemony ships. They had feigned retreat and then turned on their pursuers when the hegemony forces broke formation to chase them. They had targeted specific systems on each ship rather than trying to overwhelm shields with brute force, and they had broadcast messages throughout the battle, not pleas for mercy or requests for negotiation, but something else. Anti-Relicraft listened to one of the recovered transmissions and heard a female human voice speaking in defiant tones. You came here thinking we would be easy prey because our technology is primitive. But technology is not the same as tactics. And we have been perfecting tactics against each other since before we had metal. Another transmission played, and this one was stranger. It was poetry, or perhaps a song, something about rage and dying light and refusing to surrender. Kruvrov did not understand the cultural significance, but he understood the tone. These humans were not afraid. They were angry. The final recovered log came from Zelthar's flagship in the moments before it was destroyed. The view screen showed a human vessel approaching at impossible speed. It was on fire and venting atmosphere and clearly doomed. But instead of retreating, it was accelerating directly toward the flagship. Zelthar's voice could be heard, ordering evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. Human ships struck the flagship's bridge section, and both vessels exploded in a massive detonation. Kref replayed the footage 3 times, trying to understand the reasoning behind such a tactic. They used their ship as a suicide weapon, his tactical officer observed. Wasteful and inefficient. Effective, Kref corrected grimly. He composed his report carefully, knowing that the War Council would scrutinize every word. Zelthar's expeditionary force destroyed by human defensive fleet, he wrote. Enemy employed unconventional tactics, including ambush attacks and ramming maneuvers and suicide strikes. Human forces suffered approximately 70% casualties, but achieved complete tactical victory. Recommend immediate deployment of overwhelming force. These humans are more dangerous than initial assessments indicated. He sent the report and then ordered his fleet to establish a defensive perimeter while they waited for reinforcements. Grev was not going to repeat Zelthar's mistake of underestimating these creatures. The War Council responded with approval for his cautious approach and authorization to wait for additional forces. Within 2 cycles, a massive armada began assembling 200 warships, representing the largest military deployment the hegemony had mounted in over 500 cycle. Ship after ship arrived at the rally point until the fleet stretched across space like a metal constellation. The fleet commander for this armada was Supreme Marshal Drexena of the Korthax, and he brought with him confidence that bordered on arrogance. 200 ships against 1 primitive world, he announced to the assembled commanders. This will be the shortest campaign in hegemony history. Krev wanted to voice his concerns, but protocol dictated that he defer to the Supreme Marshal's authority. The V Armada advanced on Earth in perfect formation, and their shields interlocked to create a defensive barrier that could withstand anything short of a stellar detonation. They expected resistance, and they were prepared to crush it utterly. What they did not expect was for Earth to be empty. The human ships were gone, and the orbital facilities were abandoned, and there was no response to any hailing attempts. "Where are they?" Drexna demanded. "Find them." The sensor teams scanned the entire system but found nothing except a few automated satellites, broadcasting a repeating message. Ravath had. The message translated, and what he heard made his blood run cold. "You sent 12 ships, and they did not return," the message said in flat, emotionless tones. "You sent 36 ships, and they have not returned. Now you send 200. We will be waiting." The transmission ended, and for a long moment, nobody on any ship spoke. Then the ambush began. Human vessels appeared from behind planets and moons, and from within asteroid clusters. They had been waiting in complete sensor silence, and now they struck with coordinated precision. The battle lasted for 3 days. The hegemony Armada fought with desperation and professionalism that the humans had learned from the previous engagements. They knew exactly where hegemony shields were weakest, and they exploited every tactical vulnerability. By the end of the third day, Supreme Marshal Drexina was dead, and 147 of his ships were destroyed. The survivors fled the system in disorder, and when they reached hegemony space, they brought with them a simple, terrifying truth. No one returned after facing humans, not really, because everyone who fought them either died or came back broken and haunted by what they had witnessed. The emergency session of the War Council convened in the Grand Chamber on the hegemony capital world, and representatives from all 7 founding species gathered to discuss what had become the greatest crisis in their collective history. 3 fleets sent to annex one primitive world. 3 fleets that had either been completely destroyed or sent running back to hegemony space and defeat Counselor Vexra of the Vryn stood before the assembly, and his posture showed the weight of responsibility and shame. "The proposal to annex Earth came from my office," he began. "I reviewed the initial scans myself, and I concluded that humanity posed no significant threat to our forces. I was wrong." The chamber fell silent because admitting error was not common among the Vryn, and especially not before the full council. "The question before us now," Vexra continued, "is how we respond to this unprecedented situation." Counselor Thrace of the Korthax rose to speak, and his mechanical voice resonated through the chamber. "We must commit overwhelming force," he declared. 1,000 ships, if necessary. We cannot allow one primitive species to defy the hegemony without consequences. But Counselor Shiara of the Zelen disagreed. "We have already committed overwhelming force," she pointed out. 200 warships should have been more than sufficient to conquer any single world. Yet the humans defeated them. Perhaps we should consider quarantine instead. Isolate the Sol system and prevent humanity from expanding beyond their current territory. The debate raged for hours as various council members proposed different strategies. Some wanted immediate retaliation, while others advocated for caution, and still others suggested attempting diplomatic contact. But while the council debated, events in the galaxy moved forward without waiting for their decisions. Reports began flooding in from systems near human space. Human vessels had been detected in the Kepler sector. Human raiders had attacked the hegemony supply convoy in the Centauri cluster. A human delegation had made contact with the Torvan species and offered them an alliance. Pattern became clear. Over the following cycles, humanity was not sitting and waiting for the hegemony to make the next move. They were expanding and exploring and making contact with other species, and everywhere they went they brought with them technology that they had somehow reverse-engineered from captured hegemony vessels. The War Council watched in growing alarm as human ships appeared across a dozen systems. These vessels were strange hybrids that combined human innovation with hegemony technology in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. How are they doing this? Counselor Thrace demanded. They should not have the knowledge to operate our systems, but the intelligence reports told a disturbing story. Humans were not just studying captured technology, they were taking it apart and rebuilding it and improving it in ways that hegemony engineers had never considered. A human strike team had captured an entire hegemony supply ship, and within 2 cycles, that ship was being operated by a human crew. They had learned alien systems through trial and experimentation and sheer determined effort, and they were sharing what they learned with any species willing to listen. The reports grew worse. A hegemony military outpost had been infiltrated by human operatives, who sabotaged the reactor core and escaped before anyone realized what had happened. Hegemony Research Station reported that half their staff had simply vanished. An investigation revealed they had defected to join the humans. A diplomatic envoy from the Torvan species arrived at Hegemony headquarters and formally declared independence from hegemony oversight. When questioned, the Torvan ambassador explained that humanity had offered them protection and partnership instead of subjugation. They treat us as equals, the ambassador said simply. You never did. The council realized with growing horror that humanity was not just fighting a military campaign. They were waging a war of ideas. Every species that had been conquered or absorbed into the hegemony over the past 3,000 cycles had been told the same thing. Resistance was futile and the hegemony was eternal, and there was no alternative to obedience. But now humans were offering an alternative. They were proving that the hegemony could be resisted and defeated, and they were sharing their technology freely instead of hoarding it like the hegemony always had. Counselor Vexra rose again, and this time his voice was heavy with a burden that went beyond military defeat. The humans are not trying to conquer us, he said. They are trying to destroy the very idea of us. They want to prove that the hegemony is not inevitable, and they are succeeding. The chamber erupted in arguments, but deep down every council member knew that Vexra spoke truth. The foundation of hegemony power had always been the belief that resistance was impossible, but humanity had resisted and won. And now the belief was crumbling. More reports arrived daily. Kelrith species had declared independence. The Vorton territories were in open rebellion. 3 hegemony governors had been overthrown by their own populations. Human advisors and human weapons and human tactical support could be found in every uprising. The war council met again, and the mood had shifted from anger to something closer to desperation. We are losing control, Counselor Shiara stated flatly. Species that have been loyal for centuries are questioning our authority. Our economy is disrupting as trade routes become unreliable. Our military is stretched thin, responding to incidents across dozens of systems. Counselor Thrace proposed one final military solution. Deploy the Grand Fleet, he said. Every ship we have. Destroy Earth completely and end this threat permanently. But before the Council could vote on this proposal, new intelligence arrived that changed everything. Human scouts had made contact with the Dravix Empire on the far side of the galaxy. The Dravix were the only civilization that rivaled the hegemony in size and power, and the 2 empires had maintained an uneasy peace for over 1,000 cycles. If humanity formed an alliance with the Dravix, then the balance of power in the galaxy would shift dramatically. We cannot afford a war on 2 fronts, Counselor Vexra said quietly. The reality settled over the council like a heavy shroud. They could not defeat humanity militarily without leaving themselves vulnerable to the Dravix. They could not maintain order in their territories while fighting expanding human presence. They could not restore their authority while species across the galaxy watched humans demonstrate that resistance was possible. Perhaps, Counselor Shiara suggested carefully, it is time to consider negotiation. The word hung in the air like something forbidden. The Kryn hegemony did not negotiate with primitive species. The Kryn hegemony did not treat other civilizations as equals. The Kryn hegemony had built its power on the foundation of absolute superiority, but that foundation was cracking. Counselor Vexra stood and walked to the great window that overlooked the capital city. Behind him, the council chamber was silent as each representative grappled with the implications of what was happening. Send a diplomatic delegation to human space, Vexra finally said, offered to negotiate terms. Nobody objected because they all understood what this meant. The hegemony was admitting defeat, not military defeat in the traditional sense, but something deeper and more fundamental. They were admitting that humanity could not be conquered, that humanity had changed the rules of galactic civilization, and that the old order was ending, whether the hegemony accepted it or not. As the council session ended and the representatives departed, Councilor Vexra remained at the window. He thought about the small blue planet that had brought an empire to its knees. He thought about the humans who had refused to accept their assigned place in the galactic hierarchy, and he wondered what kind of galaxy would emerge from the ashes of the order that was now collapsing. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the war room beneath the city of Geneva and studied the holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated hegemony-controlled territory, and blue markers showed systems where humanity had established a presence, and green markers represented species that had declared independence or formed alliances with Earth. The map had changed dramatically over the past 6 months. What had started as a desperate defense of Earth had evolved into something far larger and far more complex. We are overstretched, General Marcus Chen said from across the table. We have advisors in 30 systems and military commitments in a dozen more. Earth's population is only 8 billion, and we cannot sustain this level of deployment indefinitely. Vasquez nodded, because Chen was right to be concerned. Humanity had won several impossible victories, but they were still a single planet facing an empire that controlled thousands of worlds. We are not trying to conquer the hegemony, Vasquez reminded the assembled commanders. We are trying to break it. She gestured to the holographic display and zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the hegemony core. The hegemony's power does not come from their technology or their numbers, she explained. It comes from the belief that resistance is impossible. Every species in this galaxy has been told for 3,000 years that the hegemony is eternal and inevitable. Our job is to prove that belief wrong. Colonel Sarah Martinez spoke up from her position near the tactical displays. The psychological operations are working, she reported. We have been broadcasting across every frequency we can access, telling our story and showing footage of our victories. Species across the galaxy are watching and listening. Vasquez pulled up another display showing intercepted hegemony communications. The VOHDR reports painted a picture of an empire in crisis. Rebellions were breaking out in territories that had been stable for centuries. Hegemony military forces were being redeployed constantly to respond to uprisings and incidents. Trade networks were collapsing as independent operators refused to follow hegemony regulations. The cracks are showing, Vasquez observed, but we need to be strategic about how we exploit them. She turned to Commander James Park, who oversaw humanity's intelligence operations. What is the status of our infiltration efforts? Park brought up a series of files on the display. We have operatives in place in 47 hegemony systems, he reported. Most of them are not spies in the traditional sense, but traders and merchants and diplomats. They establish contacts and build relationships and share information. The hegemony still thinks in terms of military threats, Park continued. They are watching for fleets and armies. They are not prepared for economic and cultural infiltration. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had learned long ago that wars were not won solely through military force hearts. And minds mattered just as much as ships and weapons. What about the technology sharing program? She asked. Commander Lisa Thompson stepped forward to answer. We are distributing captured hegemony technology to any species willing to form mutual defense pacts, Thompson explained. 73 worlds have signed agreements with us in the past month. We provide them with shield generators and FTL drives and weapon systems. In exchange, they agree to support each other against hegemony aggression. General Chun frowned at this information. Are we sure that is wise? He asked. We are arming species we barely know. Yes, Vasquez answered firmly, because the alternative is allowing the hegemony to maintain its monopoly on advanced technology. Every species we arm becomes another point of resistance, another crack in the hegemony foundation. The strategy was risky, but it was working. Species that had never dreamed of independence were now forming alliances and defending themselves, and humanity was at the center of this growing network of resistance. There is another factor we need to discuss, Park said carefully. We have made contact with the Dravix Empire. The room fell silent because everyone understood the implications. The Dravix controlled half the galaxy, and their relationship with the hegemony had always been tense. If the Dravix chose to take advantage of hegemony weakness, then the entire galactic order could collapse into chaos. What do the Dravix want? Vasquez asked. They want to meet with you, Park replied. They have proposed a neutral location for diplomatic talks. Vasquez considered this development carefully. Humanity needed allies, but the Dravix were not known. For altruism, any alliance with them would come with strings attached. Set up the meeting, she decided, but make it clear that we are not looking for a new overlord to replace the old one. The discussion moved on to other topics, including the status of Earth's defenses and the development of new weapon systems and the training programs for allied species. Humanity was learning and adapting at a pace that would have seemed impossible. Just months earlier, they were reverse engineering hegemony technology and improving it. They were developing new tactics based on combat experience. They were building a coalition that grew stronger with each passing day. But there were also losses to account for. 3 human vessels had been destroyed in skirmishes with hegemony forces. 17 advisors had died helping defend newly independent worlds. The war was taking its toll, even as humanity gained ground. Vasquez reviewed casualty reports after the meeting ended and felt the weight of command settle heavy on her shoulders. Every name on those reports represented someone who had believed in what humanity was fighting for, someone who had chosen to stand against impossible odds. Admiral, a young communications officer, interrupted her thoughts. We are receiving a transmission from hegemony space. They are requesting diplomatic contact. Vasquez looked up sharply. The hegemony wants to negotiate. Yes, ma'am, the officer confirmed. They are proposing a meeting at a neutral station. This was the moment Vasquez had been working toward. The hegemony had finally accepted that military force alone could not resolve this conflict. Accept their proposal, Vasquez ordered, but choose a location where they can see what we have built. She selected coordinates for a civilian trade hub that humanity had helped establish in partnership with a dozen different species. It was not a military installation, but a thriving center of commerce and culture where humans and aliens worked together as equals. Send them the coordinates and tell them we will meet in 1 week, Vasquez said. The officer departed to carry out her orders, and Vasquez returned to studying the galactic map. She thought about everything that had happened since that day when hegemony ships first appeared in Earth's sky. Humanity had been terrified and outmatched and facing certain defeat, that they had refused to surrender. They had fought with everything they had, and they had won against all rational expectations. And in winning, they had sparked something larger than themselves, a galaxy-wide awakening to the possibility of freedom. Now, the hegemony was coming to negotiate, and Vasquez knew that what happened in that meeting would shape the future of countless species. "We are not conquerors," she said quietly to the empty room. "We are liberators, and we will make sure the galaxy knows the difference." The preparations began for the most important diplomatic meeting in human history, a meeting that would determine whether the sacrifices of the past months had achieved their purpose, a meeting that would decide if humanity's vision of a free and equal galaxy could become reality. Vasquez assembled her diplomatic team carefully. She chose people who understood both human values and alien cultures, people who could negotiate from a position of strength without resorting to arrogance, people who believed that the galaxy could be better than it had been. As the week passed and the meeting approached, Vasquez felt the pressure building. The eyes of humanity and dozens of allied species would be watching. This was the moment where everything they had fought for would either be validated or proven futile. But Vasquez had learned something important during the months of conflict. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics. It was their refusal to accept that the universe was fixed and unchangeable. It was their insistence that tomorrow could be better than today, and that belief had already changed the galaxy in ways that could never be undone. The neutral station, designated Haven's Gate, orbited a dwarf star in unclaimed space, and when the hegemony delegation arrived, they found something completely unexpected. Instead of a military fortress or diplomatic compound, they discovered a bustling civilian hub where dozens of species mingled freely in markets and restaurants and common areas. Counselor Vexra led the hegemony delegation, and he stopped in the docking bay to observe the scene before him. A human merchant was negotiating with a Torvan trader, while a Kelrath engineer consulted with a human technician about some kind of power converter. Children from 3 different species played together in a recreation area while their parents conducted business nearby. "This is impossible," one of the junior hegemony diplomats whispered. "These species should not be able to cooperate like this." But Vexra understood what he was seeing. This was not just a trading station, but a demonstration. Humanity was showing the hegemony what the galaxy could become. Ambassador Jen Wei met them in the main concourse, and Vexra was struck by how ordinary she appeared. He had expected a military commander or a political leader, radiating authority and power. Instead, he found a middle-aged woman in simple civilian clothing with tired eyes and a translator device clipped to her collar. "Welcome to Haven's Gate," Chan said in flawless hegemony standard language. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. No guards and no weapons and no ceremonial displays of strength, just a woman offering hospitality to former enemies." The hegemony delegation followed Chun through the station, and Vexra noticed details that reinforced the message. Humanity was sending a medical clinic where doctors from 4 different species worked side by side, treating anyone who needed care. A school where children learned mathematics and languages from teachers representing a dozen worlds. A community garden where different species had contributed plants from their home worlds, creating a tapestry of colors and forms. "You have built something remarkable here," Vexra admitted. Chen smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. "We built what we wished the hegemony had offered us," she replied, "partnership instead of subjugation." They reached the conference room, and Vexra expected formal negotiations to begin immediately. But Chen surprised him again by offering refreshments and asking about their journey. She made small talk about the station's construction and the challenges of accommodating so many different species' environmental needs. It was all very pleasant and very deliberate. Finally, they settled into the actual negotiation, and Chen's demeanor shifted to something more serious. "I understand you have come to discuss terms for ending the conflict between our peoples," she said. Vexra nodded and activated a datapad containing the hegemony's proposal. "We are prepared to offer mutual recognition of borders," he began. "Earth and its sphere of influence will be acknowledged as independent territory. In exchange, you will cease your interference in hegemony affairs and withdraw support from rebellious elements. Chen listened patiently and then shook her head. You still do not understand, she said gently. We do not want your territory or your resources. We wanted you to stop. Vexra felt confusion ripple through him. Stop what exactly? Stop treating other species as subjects instead of equals, Chen explained. Stop hoarding technology and using it as a tool of control. Stop building an empire on the assumption that might makes right. She leaned forward, and her expression was earnest. The conflict between Earth and the hegemony was never about conquest. Chen continued. It was about proving that your system was not inevitable. That species could choose cooperation over subjugation. Vexra absorbed this and realized that Chen was speaking truth humanity had never attempted to seize. Hegemony worlds or demand tribute or impose human governance. They had simply offered an alternative. What are you proposing? He asked. Chen brought up her own data display showing a map of the galaxy. We have been building something new, she said. A coalition based on mutual defense and shared technology and equal partnership. 73 worlds have joined so far, and more are expressing interest every day. The display showed the network of alliances spreading across space like a web. We call it the Galactic Coalition, Chen explained. Every member has equal voice in decisions that affect the group. Technology is shared freely rather than controlled. No species is subordinate to any other. Vexra studied the map and saw the implications clearly. Coalition was not trying to replace the hegemony, but to render it irrelevant. You are offering us membership in this coalition, he said slowly. As equals. Chen confirmed. The same terms as everyone else. No special status and no control over other members, but also no subordination and full access to shared resources and technology. One of the other hegemony delegates objected. The Kryn hegemony has ruled for 3,000 cycles, he said. We cannot simply abandon our position. Chen's expression softened with something like sympathy. Your position is already gone, she said. The question is whether you accept reality peacefully or continue fighting until there is nothing left. The blunt truth of her words settled over the delegation. Vexra knew she was right because he had seen the intelligence reports. The hegemony was fragmenting, and the old order was collapsing whether they acknowledged it or not. How did you do this? He asked. How did a species so young and so primitive defeat us so completely? Chen considered the question carefully. You sent fleets to conquer. You was thinking military superiority would be enough. She finally said, we sent ideas to free everyone else. You thought in terms of ships and weapons and control. We thought in terms of people and hope and possibility. She paused and then continued. And there is something else you need to understand. We have been preparing for this war since before we left our caves. Every human child grows up with stories of the underdog who defeats the empire. It is not just our history, but our mythology and our identity. You started this war, but we have been training for it for 10,000 years. Vexra felt something shift inside him as he listened to this. It was not the arrogant boasting of a conqueror, but the simple statement of a fundamental truth humanity had won not because they were stronger, but because they understood something the hegemony had forgotten. Civilizations were built on ideas and beliefs and shared values, and that ideas could not be defeated with weapons. The negotiation continued for hours as they worked through the details of what hegemony membership in the coalition would mean. It was humbling for Vexra to accept that his people would be joining as equals rather than leaders, but he also recognized that the alternative was far worse: isolation and irrelevance, while the galaxy moved forward without them. Finally, they reached an agreement. The Kryn hegemony would join the Galactic Coalition as a full member with the same rights and responsibilities as every other species. They would share their technology and open their borders and accept that their age of dominance had ended. In exchange, they would receive protection and partnership and access to the new galactic order. As Vexra prepared to sign the treaty, he looked at Chun and asked one final question. What happens now? Now we build, Chun replied. We build a galaxy where every species has a voice, where technology serves everyone instead of empowering a few, where cooperation is valued more than conquest. It will not be easy, she admitted. There will be challenges and conflicts and setbacks, but at least we will face them together as equals. The treaty was signed, and the news spread across the galaxy within hours. The Kryn hegemony had joined the Galactic Coalition. The old order had officially ended in the days that followed. Vexra remained at Haven's Gate observing how the coalition operated. He watched humans and aliens working together, solving problems through discussion and compromise. He saw a species that had been enemies for generations sitting down to negotiate their differences, witnessed the beginning of something genuinely new in galactic civilization, and he understood why humanity had been so difficult to defeat. They had not been fighting for dominance or resources or glory. They had been fighting for this, for a future where cooperation replaced conquest, for a galaxy where strength came from unity instead of subjugation. As Vexra prepared to return to hegemony space and begin the difficult work of transformation, he reflected on everything that had happened. 3 fleets had been sent to Earth, and none had returned victorious. But perhaps that had been necessary. Perhaps the hegemony had needed to be broken before it could be rebuilt into something better. He thought about the young human voice that had broadcast during that first battle. We have been killing each other for 10,000 years. The voice had said, did you really think you would be harder? At the time, Vexra had not understood, but now he did. Humanity had not defeated the hegemony through superior technology. They had defeated them through superior understanding of what drove civilizations, and through the willingness to imagine a better galaxy and then fight to make it real. As his ship departed Haven's Gate, Vexra looked back at the station one final time. It was small and fragile compared to the grand structures the hegemony had built over millennia, but it represented something far more powerful than any fortress or fleet. It represented hope, and hope, as humanity had proven, was the most powerful force in the galaxy.